The corticospinal tract. The corticospinal tract originates from the cortex. Descending fibers form the corona radiata and converge to pass through the posterior limb of the internal capsule. Corticospinal fibers descend through the middle 3/5 of the crus cerebri in the basis pedunculi in the anterior part of the midbrain. In the pons, the fibers are broken up into many bundles. The corticospinal tract descends as the pyramids in the anterior part of the medulla. At the junction of the medulla and the spinal cord, most, 85 to 90% of fibers cross the midline in the decussation of the pyramids. These crossed fibers go on to form the lateral corticospinal tract. Uncrossed fibers, 10 to 15%, descend as the anterior corticospinal tract. The lateral corticospinal tract terminates on the lower motor neurons in the anterior horn of the spinal cord. The anterior corticospinal tract fibers cross the midline at the level where they terminate on the lower motor neurons. The anterior corticospinal tract provides bilateral innervation. It innervates both ipsilateral lower motor neurons and crosses over to innervate lower motor neurons on the contralateral side. Dorsal column medial lemniscus system. Axons enter the spinal cord from the spinal ganglion and pass directly to the ipsilateral posterior column. Caudal fibers below T6 enter the fasciculus gracilis, medial, and rostral fibers above T6 enter the fasciculus cuneatus to ascend. They terminate in the nucleus gracilis and the nucleus cuneatus. From these nuclei, axons of secondary neurons cross the midline as internal arcuate fibers and form the medial lemniscus. In the rostral medulla, the fibers travel as the medial lemniscus adjacent to the midline. In the pons, the medial lemniscus flattens horizontally. As the medial lemniscus continues to ascend through the rostral pons and midbrain, it moves laterally and vertically. The medial lemniscus terminates in the ventral posterolateral nucleus of the thalamus. From the thalamus, fibers project through the internal capsule and corona radiata to terminate in the primary somatosensory cortex, specifically in the postcentral gyrus. The anterolateral system, spinothalamic tract. Axons enter the spinal cord from the spinal ganglion, travel up or down 1 to 2 segments in the Lissauer tract, and then synapse into the posterior horn. Axons of secondary neurons cross the midline in the anterior white commissure and ascend as the anterolateral tract in the spinal cord. This is the anterolateral tract in the caudal medulla. In the rostral medulla, the anterolateral tract lies between the inferior olivary nucleus and the nucleus of the spinal tract of the trigeminal nerve. In the pons and midbrain, the anterolateral tract lies lateral to the medial lemniscus. The anterolateral tract terminates in the ventral posterolateral nucleus of the thalamus. From the thalamus, fibers project through the internal capsule and corona radiata to terminate in the primary somatosensory cortex, specifically in the postcentral gyrus.